king of German mercenaries.
Chapter 9, Strength in Numbers. When Smelman heard that his eldest and second sons were going to follow a knight as followers, he hurried back. Seeing that Marin was so young, he couldn't help but murmur in his heart. However, the hierarchy in medieval Europe was strict, so he did not dare to raise any objections. Moreover, he was somewhat happy that someone was willing to take over his big-eating eldest son. He just hoped that the young knight in front of him would not be eaten out of money by his eldest son. If that happened, his eldest son would be dismissed again. After the two sides had discussed it, Marin naturally planned to let Khan carry the heavy plate armor, lance and horse armor, although it was made of wood, so that he could feel relaxed and the horse could be even more relaxed. However, although Khan was strong, it was stressful for him to carry something weighing dozens of kilograms. At present, Marin did not have the money to buy pack horses for Khan and Kohler, and the cost of raising horses was also high. So, Marin thought about it and decided to ask Smelman, who was skilled in carpentry, to help him build a wheelbarrow. Why choose a wheelbarrow? It's not just because a wheelbarrow can carry goods. When it comes to carrying goods, a two-wheeled cart can carry more. However, a two-wheeled cart has a disadvantage: it is not very suitable for complex terrain. The unicycle can ignore the terrain and can be used on mountain roads. This is because the unicycle has only one wheel and is very capable of overcoming complex terrain. There are many mountain roads from southern Germany to Vienna, Austria, so an all-terrain unicycle is more suitable than a two-wheeled cart. Marin and Zimmermann returned to the city and went to the carpenter's shop where Zimmermann worked and started building a wheelbarrow. Although there are wheelbarrows in Europe, the wheels of European wheelbarrows are placed in front, which means that people need to bear a lot of force to push the wheelbarrow. Therefore, the loading capacity of European wheelbarrows is relatively small. Marin guided Smelman to build a Chinese wheelbarrow. The wheel of a Chinese wheelbarrow is in the middle. In this way, the pressure of the goods on the cart is mainly on the wheels. And the person pushing the cart is more labor-saving. A European wheelbarrow can only carry the weight of about 2 or 3 people. A Chinese wheelbarrow can carry the weight of 6 people. It is much more efficient than a European wheelbarrow and saves more labor. When the Chinese wheelbarrow was built, Marin put the armor, lance and horse armor on the wheelbarrow. The weight of 70 to 80 kilograms was nothing to Khan, who was pushing the cart. Khan was strong and good at running long distances. He learned this because the poor people in the Middle Ages could not afford to ride in a carriage and had to walk everywhere. Therefore, he was very relaxed when pushing the wheelbarrow. Sometimes, when his brother Kohler was tired, Khan would let Kohler sit on the wheelbarrow to rest for a while. He would continue to push the wheelbarrow and follow Marin on horseback. Marin was also much more relaxed. After throwing off the dozens of kilograms of armor and weapons, he felt much more relaxed. The warhorse Karl also felt relaxed. If Marin hadn't controlled his speed, Karl, who felt much more relaxed, would have wanted to gallop. Khan was indeed a big eater, eating at least 6 pounds of food every day, mainly ordinary black bread, normal bread without soil or sawdust, and some vegetables, and sometimes meat, consuming an average of about 10 pfennigs a day. Marin didn't have much money now, so he had to take Khan and Kohler to stay in a low-end hotel. If the room was bigger, Marin would let Khan and Kohler sleep on the floor. If it was smaller, he would let Khan and Kohler stay in one room, and he would stay in another room alone. Because he was dissatisfied with the dirty quilts in the hotels of that era, Marin bought a new set of goose-down quilts. There was no cotton in Europe at that time, so there were no quilts, put them in a rainproof pigskin bag, and put them on Khan's wheelbarrow. Every time he stayed in a hotel, Marin threw the hotel's original dirty quilts to Khan and Kohler. He himself covered himself with the clean quilt he brought. After all, Khan and Kohler were pure medieval people, and they had no difficulty adapting to this. The only thing they couldn't adapt to was that Marin always forced them to take a bath. Then, the two guys were also trained by Marin to be clean and tidy, no more lice on their bodies, and their clothes were clean. This made the two guys very uncomfortable. After all, they were used to being dirty since they were young. Since there are 2 more mouths to feed around Marlin, and one of them is a big glutton, Marlin decides to restart his hunting plan. Marlin's plan was actually very simple. It was a long distance from the town to the depths of the Black Forest. If he didn't ride a horse, he would be very tired and there would not be enough time. If he stayed in the forest after dark, he would be easily eaten by wolves. For this reason, Marin asked Khan to stay in the inn to look after his armor and lance, while he himself, carrying a bow and arrow, rode with Kohler to the depths of the Black Forest. Kohler was still a 15-year-old boy, still a little skinny. He weighed only about 70 or 80 kilograms. He and Marin rode together, and in fact, the difference between him and Marin was not that big. For a certain period of time, the warhorse Karl could fully withstand it. If Karl were to ride with Kahn, that bull, I guess it would be too much for him to bear. When they reached the depths of the Black Forest, Marin dismounted and asked Kohler to lead the horse and wait for him outside. He, holding a bow and arrow, crept towards the herds of deer in the forest. With the help of tall grass in the forest, Marin managed to get close to a group of red deer. Then, at a distance of 30 meters, Marin drew his bow and shot a strong male red deer. But when shooting at the other fleeing red deer, Marin fired blanks. Of course, Marin was not discouraged. He was lucky enough to kill a large red deer. Later, Marin shot 2 more hares. At noon, Marin tied up the carcasses of the wild deer and hare and put them on the horse's back, while he and Kohler led the horses back on foot. Back at the inn, Marin asked the cook to roast both fat rabbits. As a result, Kahn ate a whole large roasted rabbit by himself, while Marin and Kohler shared the other smaller one. The next morning, Marin asked Kahn to push the elk carcass in a wheelbarrow to the nearest city and sell it. This red deer was smaller than the one Marlin caught last time. Also, the deer hide was a little damaged because of the arrow. So, Marlin only sold it for 800 pfennigs. But this also made Marlin very happy. Seeing Marin making money so easily, Kahn felt itchy. The next day, at Kahn's request, the owner of the Malintu Inn kept his armor and lance, and he took Kahn and Kohler to the Black Forest again. Of course, because the horses could not carry them, they were limited in how far they could go into the forest. But fortunately, they did encounter prey. Kahn thought it should be easy to shoot a wild deer with a bow and arrow, so Marin silently handed the bow and arrow to Kahn and asked him to try. As expected, Kahn had no talent for archery at all, and basically just shot arrows, and it was outrageous. He shot 30 arrows, and the whole tube of arrows was used up, but he didn't see a single deer hair hit. Kohler also tried, and although his accuracy was much better than Kahn's, he still couldn't hit the target. After all, archery is not something that can be mastered overnight. Especially when shooting wild deer from dozens of meters away, it really requires a certain level of skill. The average person may be able to hit the target after practicing a few times at a target 10 meters away. But it is impossible to practice shooting prey from 30 to 40 meters away in a short period of time. And those wild animals with high alertness will not let you get within 10 meters of them. Therefore, it is difficult to hunt with a bow and arrow unless you are an experienced driver. It is easier to aim with a crossbow. However, crossbows were banned in many places in Europe in the Middle Ages. If you want to buy a crossbow, no one dares to sell it. Although the ban on crossbows in the 15th century was not enforced as thoroughly as before, it was still difficult for ordinary people to obtain crossbows. Because the nobles were also afraid that civilians would use crossbows to stab them, so most of them supported the ban on crossbows. Only the military is allowed to equip crossbows. If civilians own crossbows, they may be accused of having the motive to assassinate nobles. After the 2 failed attempts, they had to admire Marin's superb archery skills and marvel at the strength of the knights. In fact, Marin's archery skills have nothing to do with whether he is a knight. He was bored in his previous life and spent several years practicing in the mountains behind his hometown. Who would waste time practicing archery for ordinary European knights? Only a wretched country like Britain, knowing that it could not compete with France in knights, specially developed longbow soldiers. Generally speaking, only the old hunters in Europe were proficient in archery. With the emergence of matchlocks, many hunters who kept up with the times also switched to matchlocks and gave up the bow and arrow, which was very difficult to train. After Kahn and Kohler gave up the attempt at archery, Marin entered hunter mode again. After Kahn and Kohler gave up the attempt at archery, Marin entered hunter mode again. Kohler was smart, and he suggested that after Marin's sneak attack, he let Kahn, a big fool who was good at running, go out from a specific direction to drive the deer and drive the deer towards the direction of Marin's ambush. In this way, Marin could get a second chance to shoot. Unlike before, after shooting the first deer, the rest of the deer ran away directly. Marin adopted this suggestion and asked Kahn to ambush the deer in another direction. When Marin shot the first arrow, Kahn suddenly ran out and rushed towards the deer, driving the deer towards the direction of Marin's ambush. The first cooperation was not successful because Kahn drove the deer in the wrong direction. After several cooperations, Kahn gradually mastered the way to drive the deer. Even when the deer deviated from the predetermined direction, Kahn used the method of throwing stones to forcibly correct the deer's escape direction. Marin discovered that Kahn was not good at archery, but he was pretty good at throwing stones. Then, after being hit for the first time, the deer really fled towards the place where Marin was ambushing. Marin faced the oncoming herd of deer, drew his bow and shot another one. Then the herd of deer was stunned and found that there was a trap ahead. Then, they turned around and ran away. However, it takes time to stop and change direction while running. Deer are deer after all, not humans, and their brains react slower. When changing direction, the deer were obviously stunned for a moment. But just like that, Marin took the opportunity to shoot another deer. After a final count, the three of them worked together and managed to kill 3 deer in half a day. Sure enough, the team is stronger. How does the saying go, there is strength in numbers? Marin was extremely moved. Thinking back to the past, when I went hunting, I always worried about my warhorse being stolen. Now, when hunting, Kohler is responsible for watching the horses, while Khan helps drive the prey, which greatly improves efficiency. The next day, Marin pulled the 3 deer into the city again and sold them for 1,900 pfennigs, which was a huge sum of money. At least, it was enough to feed the lazy Khan and Kohler. Later, considering that Kohler was not strong and could not stand walking for a long time, Marin spent 1,000 pfennigs to buy a half-grown calf, equipped it with a saddle, and let Kohler ride on it. Cows are different from horses. Horses are more delicate and need to eat feed regularly. Cows, on the other hand, only need to eat grass. They only need to eat extra food when they are plowing the land and their energy consumption is too great. It can be said that the cost of raising cattle is much lower than that of raising horses. This is also one of the important reasons why ancient Chinese farmers raised cattle to plow the land instead of horses. Marin bought a cow for Kohler to ride, and a big reason for this was the cost of feeding. His own warhorse cost 10 pfennigs a day. If he bought another horse, the cost would be much higher. Therefore, buying a cow was the best choice. The calf bought for Kohler seemed to have a bad temper and was undisciplined at first, but Marin first made the calf drunk with strong liquor, then put a copper ring on the nose of the calf, and the calf immediately became obedient. In the days that followed, Marin would leave his equipment at the hotel, and then go hunting with Khan and Kohler on a horse and a cow in the depths of the Black Forest. The specific assignment was, Marin and Kohler rode the horses, while Khan rode the cow. After arriving at the end of the field, Kohler looked after the horse and cow, while Khan cooperated with Marin to hunt. In this way, this golden combination of 3 people killed a lot of prey in the Black Forest, and sold a lot of prey. When they killed all the way to the Danube River in the east of the Black Forest, Marin had earned more than 100 marks by selling prey, and most of it was exchanged for gold coins. Chapter 10 The Emperor has not yet recruited soldiers. But after leaving the Black Forest, Marin discovered that the prey began to decrease sharply. Why? Because Marin entered the agricultural area of southern Germany. The southern region of Germany is relatively warm, and agriculture is more developed than in the north. The population here is denser and the development is more advanced. The high development means less natural forests. Then, there are fewer wild animals. On the way to Vienna, Marin and his 2 companions wanted to repeat their old tricks. Unfortunately, in densely populated areas, there were few wild animals, and with the hunting of nearby hunters, Marin could no longer hunt prey every day. Sometimes, it would take 2 or 3 days for Marin and his 2 companions to catch a prey. Even then, the prey might just be a hare, which was not enough for the glutton Khan to fill his teeth with. In order to supplement his food expenses, Marin began to look for roads near forests to walk on. After all, southern Germany is a mountainous area, and there are more wild animals near forests. But this also had a disadvantage, that is, Marin and his 2 companions were robbed by bandits. But these bandits were really not up to the standard, and when Marin bravely charged forward with his lance and knocked the bandit leader flying, the bandits were frightened and fled in all directions. Marin realized the problem and stopped putting all his weapons and armor on the wheelbarrow when traveling. Instead, he kept wearing the breastplate. But Marin felt that the regular Gothic plate breastplate was too restrictive on the waist, making it inconvenient to bend down or turn around to avoid the opponent's spear or lance. Because of this, the knights often fought with each holding a lance and colliding with each other like robots, which was very mechanical. So he found a blacksmith who was good at making armor, and asked the blacksmith to use the cold forging method to make him a 2/3 breastplate similar to the one worn by French cuirassiers during the Napoleonic War. This breastplate only protects the vital parts, not the waist. But at the same time, it also frees the knight's waist, allowing him to bend and turn flexibly on horseback. Moreover, its structure is also very simple. It is actually 2 cold-forged solid iron plates, strung together with ropes and hung on the shoulders. Then, the perforated area below can be tied with ropes. Then, Marin asked the blacksmith to make a cavalry sword with a guard similar to the later European cavalry. The reason for making the cavalry sword was to deal with emergencies. Because Marin's plate armor and lance were usually on the wheelbarrow. If he encountered a bandit on foot, Marin still had time to put on his armor and pick up his lance. If he encountered a fast charge from a bandit on horseback, he might not even have that much time to react. Therefore, pulling out the cavalry sword from his waist became the best option. The cavalry sword that adopts the standard cavalry sword style of later generations has a straight blade and can be used for stabbing or chopping, which is more convenient and practical. Moreover, this kind of sword looks very beautiful. As for Conn and Kohler, Marin bought them 2 spears and asked them to stab the enemy with the spears at critical moments. What Marin didn't expect was that after Conn got the spear, he didn't stab the robber, but killed a wild boar. One day, when Marin and his 2 companions were on their way, they suddenly encountered a wild boar that was out of its mind. The wild boar quickly rushed towards Marin's mount, scaring him so much that he didn't know what to do. He drew his saber, but the wild boar was short and hard to cut. He went to the carriage to get his lance, but it was too late. At the critical moment, Conn stood up, raised his spear, and stabbed the wild boar with all his strength. He failed to stab the wild boar once, because the wild boar's skin was too thick, so Conn stabbed it again. Finally, before the wild boar rushed to the warhorse Karl, Conn stabbed it in the vitals and it began to roll on the ground and wail. Marin reacted quickly and dismounted, drew his cavalry sword and killed the wild boar. Then, the wild boar was sold for a good price. In view of Conn's loyalty to his master, Marin gritted his teeth, took out 1,800 shillings from his private treasury, bought a strong black cow, and then bought a carriage and hitch for a small 4-wheeled carriage. In this way, Conn was promoted from a wheelbarrow porter to a bullock cart driver. Similarly, this strong bull had a bad temper. Marin used the same trick again, using strong liquor and a copper nose ring to tame the strong bull. After that, this big black bull named Li Chen by Marin became a draft ox to pull the cart. Sadly, Conn didn't seem to be very good at driving the ox cart. The skinny Kohler quickly got the hang of driving the ox cart. Then, Conn went to ride the calf. Kohler started to drive the ox cart. When Marin named the big black bull, he also named it Dallas out of fun. Seeing Conn riding a bull with a lance, Marin suddenly had a bad idea and planned to train Conn into a bull rider. Then, he began to teach Conn how to use a lance while riding on a horse. So, the ignorant Conn began to learn how to be a bull rider, according to Marin's deception. When the 3 arrived in Vienna in early May, Conn had already learned to ride on a bull and stab people with a spear. Even the calf he rode, Dallas, could cooperate with Conn to launch a trot charge in a short period of time. Under the contemptuous eyes of the guards at the gate of Vienna, Conn rode a bull, held a spear, and followed Marin into Vienna with a proud look on his face. It felt like Conn had become a real knight. As for Kohler, Fan Bingbing was possessed, and she was low-key whipping the big black bull, Li Chen, with a whip, driving the bullock cart, and following behind the 2. After entering Vienna and settling down in a hotel, Marin excitedly inquired about the emperor's recruitment of soldiers. But what disappointed Marin was that the emperor had no plans to recruit mercenaries recently. As early as 1487, Maximilian I recruited a German mercenary force of 15,000 infantry and 1,500 cavalry, led by Count Frederick II von Hohenzollern of the Hohenzollern family. However, there is a problem. At this time, almost all emperors, kings and dukes in Europe were in bad financial situations. Even as the Holy Roman Emperor, Maximilian I could only rely on taxes from Austria controlled by the Habsburg family and the newly controlled Duchy of Burgundy to support his huge family and even larger mercenary army. These 15,000 infantry and 1,500 knights have already put a tight financial strain on Maximilian I. In the absence of a war, Maximilian I will not expand the army. Moreover, the taxes collected by Austria and Burgundy under the control of the Habsburg family were not all used to support the army. A large part of the taxes were also used to support the huge official groups and nobles of all classes in the 2 places. The Habsburg family alone had a lot of collateral nobles to support. Otherwise, the emperor's finances would not be so tight. In addition, the emperor could temporarily levy war taxes on Hanseatic commercial cities and other imperial cities within the Holy Roman Empire during wartime based on the agreement between the 2 parties. Because the independence of these commercial cities was specially granted by the emperor. Therefore, in return, when the emperor launched a war, they were obliged to provide a certain amount of military funds for the emperor. However, this money is not so easy to get. If the emperor is fighting a war against foreign invasion, such as the invasion of the Ottoman Turks, these cities will not hesitate to provide certain taxes. But if the emperor is fighting an internal war, these cities may not be willing to pay taxes. Or, even if they pay taxes, they will be greatly discounted, or they will be reluctant to pay taxes. At the same time, during wartime, the emperor can also temporarily increase taxes in Austria and Burgundy under the control of the Habsburg family for war. However, the daily taxes of Austria and Burgundy were not enough to support the mercenary army. The emperor did not have the financial resources to expand the army unless it was wartime. This is the drawback of the European fiefdom system: taxes do not go to the central government, but to local lords. This leads to financial difficulties for the central dynasty, and there is no money to support too many troops. Unlike the feudal dynasties of China, since the Qin dynasty, all finances belong to the court, so that the Chinese dynasty has enough financial resources to support hundreds of thousands of troops. It seems that Europe did not begin to establish a stable, unified modern tax system until the end of the 17th century. Then, in the 18th century, European national wars were no longer on the scale of tens of thousands of people, but on large-scale ones of hundreds of thousands or even millions of people. Marin recalled the history he had learned in his previous life and discovered that although King Charles VIII of France had declared his sovereignty over the Kingdom of Naples at the beginning of the year, he had not yet assembled enough troops to invade Naples. It seems that Charles VIII only assembled 37,000 troops to march into Italy at the end of August this year. At present, Charles VIII's envoys are probably still recruiting mercenaries in Switzerland. The news that Charles VIII was preparing for war should have reached Vienna, but it would take a long time for Vienna to make a decision to fight. You know, the Holy Roman Empire was a country similar to the aristocratic parliament system. Whether to go to war with the French, the imperial parliament would probably have to argue for a long time. The main point was that if the emperor wanted to go to war, he needed to expand the army. To expand the army, war taxes would be levied, and commercial cities would have to temporarily levy war taxes. Even dukes and counts from all over the country were obliged to contribute some money to the emperor during the war. But just for this little money, it would probably take several months of arguing to no avail. Of course, those nobles were not worried about the money. They were just afraid that the emperor would become stronger by expanding the army, and then get rid of them. You know, there is a history of this. The King of France has done this kind of thing. Starting with Philip IV, the King of France began to suppress the princes and even confiscated church property. Philip IV, this bastard, even clashed with the Pope over the collection of tithes and directly sent people to kidnap the Pope to Avignon, France. It was precisely because this bastard kidnapped the Pope that Italy began the Renaissance without the constraints of the Pope for 100 years. Of course, this is going off topic. In short, if those nobles really support the emperor with all their strength, they will inevitably get into trouble in the end and lose their own privileges of autonomy. After all, emperors are ruthless. According to my memory, the Holy Alliance against the French invasion of Italy seemed to have been established in March 1495. At that time, the Holy Roman Empire really joined the war. Therefore, Marin can be sure that the Holy Roman Empire will not expand its military recently. Even if it expands its military, it will at least be passive expansion after the French army officially enters Italy in August, and it was only the beginning of May. He would not be able to join the emperor's army for at least 3 months.